Imagine waking up when the rest of your country is going to sleep, drinking your third cup of instant coffee, and preparing to transform your identity for 8 hours straight. For millions of Filipinos, this is not just a job. It is a daily performance of survival. They sit in freezing air-conditioned rooms in Pasig, Cebu, or Davao, putting on a headset and effectively erasing who they are. They are told to flatten their vowels, to curl their RS, and to adopt a geography that isn't theirs. They become Mark from Ohio or Sarah from California, stripping away the cadence of their heritage to appease a voice on the other side of the world. But beneath this economic exchange lies a deep, festering wound, a silent shame that has plagued the Philippines for decades. It is a belief that their version of English, the one they grew up speaking in schools and homes, is somehow broken, inferior, or low class. It is a shame that says unless you sound like you were born in the West, you aren't intelligent. But what if that shame was based on a lie? What if the very accent the world mocked was actually the future of the global language? To understand the pain of this mockery, we have to understand the unique architecture of the Filipino tongue and the history that shackled it. For nearly half a century, the American colonial education system drilled a specific ideology into the Filipino psyche. English is a language of power, and local languages are the languages of servitude. This created a fractured society where your accent determined your social worth. If you spoke with a sharp, staccato rhythm of Tagalog or the melodic lilt of Cebuano bleeding into your English, you were labeled Bojui or uneducated. This wasn't just distinct to foreigners. The worst critics were often fellow Filipinos. We created a hierarchy where the Conyo accent, a soft, distinct blend of wealthy Manila private school intonation, was acceptable, but the barrack or hard-hitting provincial English was a punchline of every joke. This internal discrimination created a glass ceiling. Brilliant engineers, writers, and thinkers were often sidelined in multinational meetings not because their ideas were bad, but because their delivery didn't match the Hollywood standard of what intelligence is supposed to sound like. The mockery focuses on the errors, the way F becomes P, or how V becomes B. The internet is littered with viral videos of Filipinos being ridiculed for saying hippopotamos or mixing up their pronouns. But this obsession with grammar policing ignores a fundamental truth about how language works. For decades, the Philippines was treated as a linguistic colony, a place where English was merely borrowed and meant to be returned in pristine condition. The West and the global corporate machine treated Filipino English as a fossilized error, a broken version of the real thing. This mindset fueled the massive ESL, English as a second language, industry, which profited by telling Filipinos they needed to be fixed. It created a generation of workers who were terrified to speak up in meetings, not because they lacked the answer, but because they were paralyzed by the fear of slipping up on a vowel sound. It was a psychological cage, built by colonialism and locked by the global economy. Let me tell you the story of Leo. Leo is a composite of every Filipino who has ever felt this thing. Leo graduated cum laude with a degree in philosophy. He reads Plato and Kant. He understands the nuances of geopolitics. But Leo works in a call center because the local wages of professors can't support his family. Every night, Leo takes calls from customers in the U.S. who ask him, "Where are you located?" When he admits he is in the Philippines, the tone shifts. He hears a sigh on the other end. He hears a "let me speak to someone American." It doesn't matter that Leo's grammar is actually perfect, often better than the caller's. It doesn't matter that his vocabulary is vast. All the caller hears is an otherness in his voice, and that otherness is equated with incompetence. Leo began to believe it too. He started to hate his own voice. He stopped speaking Ilocano at home to practice his twang. He was erasing himself, bit by bit, believing that to be successful, he had to stop being Filipino. But the tides of history often turn in the most unexpected places. The validation Leo needed didn't come from his boss or his government. It came from the hallowed halls of academia, specifically from the Ivy League circles where the study of world Englishes was beginning to revolutionize linguistics. For years, the academic stance was prescriptivism, the idea that there is one standard English, British or American, and everything else is a deviation. But a new wave of sociolinguists, including scholars from Harvard and other top institutions, began to look at the data differently. They stopped asking, how can we fix Filipino English? And started asking, is Filipino English a separate, legitimate language system? The pivotal moment came when these scholars, analyzing the global spread of the language, realized that the errors Filipinos were making weren't errors at all. They were features. This was a bombshell that exploded the myth of the wrong accent. This brings us to the Harvard truth. While not a single viral video, it represents a collective consensus of top-tier linguistic anthropology that finally trickled down to the public consciousness. It was a realization that American English itself was once marked by the British. In the 1700s, British elites thought Americans sounded uneducated, guttural, and improper. But as America became an economic superpower, their errors became the standard. The professor's argument was simple but revolutionary. Power dictates correctness. And the Philippines, with over 100 million speakers, had reached a critical mass where its version of English was no longer a learner's dialect but a sovereign variety. When a Filipino says comfort room instead of restaurant, or salvage to mean extrajudicial killing, or for a while instead of please hold, these are not mistakes. These are vocabulary entries in the lexicon of Philippine English. The Harvard truth was the academic seal of approval that said, you are not speaking broken English. You are speaking a legitimate, standardized dialect of a global language. This revelation changes everything. It reframes a Taglish code switching and the unique sentence structures not as signs of low intelligence, but as evidence of high linguistic agility. The study of world Englishes posits that a Filipino who speaks this way is actually operating on a complex cognitive level, navigating two grammar systems simultaneously. The professor's insight went further, suggesting that the neutral accent is a myth. No one has a neutral accent. An American from the Midwest has an accent. A Londoner has an accent. The demand for a neutral accent in the BPO industry is actually a demand for American approximations. By labeling the Filipino accent as heavy or thick, the West was engaging in linguistic imperialism. The truth told by the academics was that clarity is the only metric that matters. And studies show that when it came to business communication, the Filipino style of English, which tend to be polite, indirect, and service-oriented, was actually more effective in de-escalating conflict than the aggressive, direct style of New York English. Why does this matter? Because the Philippines dominates the global voice industry. This isn't just because labor is cheap. There are cheaper places in the world. It is because of cultural affinity and linguistic malleability. The Filipino speaker has a superpower that the Harvard linguists identified, the ability to empathize through language. The sing-song quality of the Filipino accent, often marked as unprofessional by strict standards, actually conveys warmth and approachability. In a world of robotic AI customer service, the humanity in the Filipino voice became a premium asset. The irony is palpable. The very trait that Filipinos were shamed for, their emotional, melodic way of speaking, became the billion-dollar engine of their economy. The Harvard truth validated that the Filipino way of speaking wasn't just valid, it was economically superior in the context of global service. When Leo realizes this, the chains begin to loosen. He understands that his difficulty in pronouncing the TH sound perfectly doesn't make him stupid. It just means his native phonology is influencing his second language, a phenomenon that happens to French, German, and Spanish speakers who are rarely marked with the same ferocity. The Harvard truth exposes the racism inherent in accent shaming. Why is a French accent considered sexy and a Filipino accent funny? It has nothing to do with the sound, and everything to do with the perception of the country's economic power. By understanding this, Leo stops apologizing. He realizes that his English is the English of the ASEAN region. It is the English of the future Asian century. He begins to see his accent not as a stain, but as a badge of his history, a history of a people who took the language of their colonizer and made it their own. This shift is now happening in real time. We are seeing a new generation of Filipinos, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, who are refusing to code switch. On TikTok, on Twitter, and in boardrooms, they are reclaiming the P4F substitution not as an error, but as an identity marker. They are using terms like SLR, sorry late reply, or G, game let's go, which are evolving into a distinct digital dialect. The academic validation provided a shield against the trolls. Now, when someone mocks a Filipino syntax, the defense is no longer silence. The defense is, this is how we speak. Deal with it. It is a declaration of linguistic independence. The English language is no longer owned by England or America. It is a democracy, and the Philippines is one of the largest voting blocs. The Harvard truth also dismantled the idea of competence. For years, standardized tests like the IELTS or TOEFL were the gatekeepers of Filipino dreams. While these tests are still necessary for migration, the mindset around them has changed. We now know that a Filipino nurse in London saves lives just as effectively as a British one, regardless of whether she pronounces vital signs with a V or a B. The competence is in the knowledge, the care, and the speed of thought. The language is merely the vessel. By separating accent from ability, the academic community helped liberate the Filipino professional from the imposter syndrome that kept them subservient for so long. It allowed them to demand better pay, better treatment, and equal respect. We must also address the Carabao English myth. For generations, rural Filipinos were told they sounded like water buffaloes, slow, heavy, unrefined. This classist slur was a weapon used by the Manila elite against the provinces. But the linguists pointed out something profound. Rural dialects often preserve older, more formal structures of English that have been lost in the West. The formality of men, sir, the usage of vine for food, these are remnants of a classical education, preserved in the amber of the provinces. Far from being low class, these speakers are custodians of a certain kind of linguistic history. The Harvard truth is that there is dignity in every dialect. It taught us that the purpose of language is connection, and if you are judging someone's grammar while they are trying to connect with you, you are the one with a communication problem, not them. This journey of acceptance is crucial because the Philippines is exporting its culture at an unprecedented rate. As the diaspora grows, Philippine English is being heard in hospitals in the UK, construction sites in the Middle East, and schools in America. It is becoming a global fixture. The Harvard truth serves as a reminder to the diaspora, don't lose your tongue. When you migrate, you don't have to leave your accent at the airport. You can assimilate without disintegrating. You can be understood without sounding like you are from somewhere else. The professors and linguists have given you the data. Now you must provide the courage. The courage to speak your truth in your own voice. But the most important audience for this truth isn't the American caller or the Harvard academic. It is a Filipino child. It is a student in a public school in Iloilo who is afraid to raise their hand because they might mispronounce characteristic. It is a teenager who is bullied in an online game for their accent. For them, this validation is a lifeline. It tells them that their intelligence is not defined by how closely they can mimic a colonizer. It tells them that their thoughts have value, regardless of the packaging. When we stop mocking Filipino English, we stop mocking the Filipino soul. We start to accept that our history, with all its trauma and complexity, has created something unique, a hybrid language that is resilient, adaptable, and beautiful. So, the next time you hear Filipinos speaking English with that distinct, rhythmic cadence, do not correct them. Do not laugh. Listen to the history in their voice. Listen to the resilience required to master a language that was forced upon them, and the brilliance required to make it their own. The Harvard professors and the Oxford linguists have spoken, and their verdict is clear. The Philippines didn't break the English language. They enriched it. They expanded it. They gave it a new home in the Pacific. The mockery was never about the language. It was about power. And now that we know the truth, we can take that power back. The days of the neutral accent are numbered. The era of global English is here. And in this new era, the Filipino voice is not a whisper in the back of the room. It is a voice at the front, leading the conversation. The truth is out, the shame is gone, and the world is finally listening.